Okay,
Like talking to a child.
I know it. You think I'd know better by now, huh, Kenny?
Yep.
All right. All right, so we are on record and we call the meeting to order. We're going to dispense with this first part of this whole agenda here. So we can let Ed talk. I'm going to bring up his presentation. We're going to jump to this and then we'll go back to the agenda after we're done with Ed. So I'm going to bring up his presentation. New share. All I gotta do is find it. There it is, right there. And go up to the top of it. Why isn't it moving? It's frozen. Why is it frozen?
Maybe click in another slide.
No. Let me go back and try it again, see if it that's nice. Wonder why it's doing that. It's got an orange box around it too. I don't know what that means. Let me stop that share. Let me see if I can open it on my computer here. It should be. Oh, it's not moving on my computer either, so I'm gonna have to reopen it.
I'm wondering whether I could open it on my screen.
Well, I can get it. I just have to go back and. Okay. All I gotta do is find it. All right. Open that back up. Or maybe because it enable editing. Maybe that was why. Okay. Now let me go back to Zoom. Let's try it again. Now let me see if it's going to move.
There we go.
There we go. Yeah. Okay. Okay, Ed, it's all yours. Just a little background, everybody. Ed and I have been talking, well, email correspondence, and we did talk on the phone since January 15th. Ed was introduced to me and me to Ed through Jack Cohen from Beltel Association. Jack and I go back to an organization, if you remember, years ago when we were looking at an umbrella corporation, was Protect Seniors that we were going to talk to. So Jack was part of that, and then I was asked to be on their board, and then I didn't even know until Ed told me that they folded. Protect Seniors folded. So anyway, Jack put me in touch with Ed and Ed with me, and we talked about pension de-risking and all that stuff, and Ed said he'll put together a presentation and come and present it to the board. This is a hot topic for us, obviously, because everything that G's doing, and I call it G's nibbling around the edges here, doing different things in different spots, in different ways, from buyouts, freezes, and all the different things, you know, actually de-risking. Ed'll talk about the definition of de-risking in a second here. So that's kind of the background on how Ed and I got together, and he's got a lot of expertise in this area, and he's going to share it with us now. All right, Ed,
Okay,
you're on.
John, thanks. If you could click on the next slide, that would be great. I'll just let you know which one to go to, and hopefully they'll move. All right. So thank you for that introduction. I've been working with Jack Cohen and the Association of Beltel Retirees for a decade. I did work with Protect Seniors for a while. Kind of unfortunate what happened with them. I'm not really entirely sure why, but things got into a situation that they couldn't really overcome. They were originally created by the Association of Belltel Retirees to do their lobbying, because the Association of Belltel, they're a 501c3, and 501c3s, just like 501c5s, have limitations on how much lobbying they can do directly. So the idea initially behind Protect Seniors was to be a lobbying vehicle that they could use, and it was essentially funded by grants by the Association of Belltel Retirees. The goal was to grow it outside of just the Bell family and expand to other groups. And for a while that did happen, but they lost a lot of that momentum and never really grew outside of the Bell family. So if the Belltel retirees weren't getting contributions from their members, Protect Seniors wasn't getting contributions. And that was kind of what led to the decline. But the concept was a very good one. And I did lobby on behalf of them in a number of different states and had some success, which I'll tell you about a little bit later. But I got involved initially when Verizon kicked out 41,000 people from its defined benefit plan and put them into a group annuity contract with Prudential. I had just been involved in a very prominent liquidation in the state of New York for the Executive Life Insurance Company of New York. And what happened there was that company was placed into rehabilitation decades ago, over 25 years ago. And they languished in rehabilitation for more than 20 years. And then at some point, people realized that they didn't have sufficient enough assets to meet their liabilities. And so they tried to convert the rehabilitation to a liquidation. And in doing that, the only way they could do it and make it work, and again, insurance companies can't go through bankruptcy. They have to go through insurance liquidation under the insurance law of the state where they reside. So they went through New York state insurance law and New York state liquidation, and they wound up cutting $920 million of benefits from annuity recipients, some of whom were retirees. And so I opposed the liquidation plan for a number of different reasons. And I wound up representing hundreds of individuals who had their benefits reduced. Some of them I managed to get their benefits paid. Some of them I didn't. But I was very involved in the liquidation process itself and in trying to get it, to work, and came up against a buzzsaw and learned a lot about the way insurance companies liquidate and how complicated and political it is. So my big takeaway from that is stay away from an insurance company liquidation at all costs. It never works the way you would like it to work. But in any event, if you could go to the next slide, we're talking about de-risking just generally. De-risking can take many forms, right? It's really any decision by a defined benefit plan sponsor to reduce liabilities. That includes freezing a plan, an annuity buy-in where it's still covered under ERISA, offering lump sums to retirees, what's known as a annuity buyout or a lift out, where like with the Verizon transaction I talk about, they kick people out of the plan and they transfer them over to an insurance company. And that's what I'll spend most of my time talking about. There's also, a whole movement towards liability-driven investing, where the pension plan itself invests in various different instruments designed to address kind of the long duration liabilities of a pension plan. That's also considered a form of de-risking. But the real crux of it, from my standpoint, involves de-risking via the purchase of an annuity contract. So when you have a defined benefit plan, you're getting your pension, you're covered by ERISA, which is a federal law passed in 1974 that provides uniform protections to retirees. And what happened in 2012, and the way this has evolved is, plan terminations using annuities have been in existence for a very long time. And essentially, if a company is going bankrupt or winding down its business and they still have a pension, very often they'll terminate the plan. And they'll terminate the plan by purchasing an annuity contract to make all of the payments, and then the plan doesn't exist anymore. And that's happened quite a bit over the past 50 years or so. But what started happening with the Verizon transaction was, instead of just terminating the plan, Verizon amended the plan. They made an amendment and said, we're going to amend the plan, and we're going to take 41,000 people, put them into what's called an allocated group annuity contract, and keep the plan in place. So today, the Verizon has a pension plan that still has more than 50,000 participants in it, but 41,000 were essentially kicked out. They had no say in the process, and now they get their payments from Prudential. Now, if you go to the next slide,
Yeah.
please, John, that would be great. So why does that really matter? Some would say, okay, isn't Prudential well suited to make annuity payments? Well, they are. But first of all, you'll never get a cost of living increase if you're in a group annuity contract. In fact, the contracts themselves prohibit it. The payments under these allocated group annuity contracts have to be fixed and determined from the outset. So you will only get the payments that you're getting. So any promise of a COLA is gone. Now, there haven't been a lot of COLAs over recent years, but that was something in the past that did happen from time to time. So in addition to losing kind of the uniform protections that you have under ERISA, and then you default to state law, when you drill down, you think about, well, what does it really mean to a retiree? Well, under ERISA, creditors can't get at your pension. Under an annuity contract, it depends what state you live in. And that's one of the big issues that we try and address at the state level. Obviously, ERISA allows ready access to the federal courts. You lose that altogether, which means you can't sue for breach of fiduciary duty, and you can't hold the fiduciaries accountable under ERISA, and you're not allowed, and you no longer get annual statements or any statements about how your annuity is performing. And you don't even get an annuity. You actually just get a certificate under the group annuity contract. Under ERISA, the fiduciaries are held to a fiduciary standard when it comes to investing. Ironically, they're not held to a fiduciary standard when they decide to amend or terminate the plan. Then they're held to an administrative standard, or what's known as a settlor standard, which means they're making an administrative decision and they don't have to take into consideration their fiduciary role. There's a lot of case law that's evolved in this area, none of it very good for retirees. Essentially, what the courts have concluded is that fiduciaries, the people who are fiduciaries under ERISA can also wear two hats. They can act as a settlor of the pension plan, and they can also act as a fiduciary when it comes to investments. It's a very unfortunate development, and one that I'm very opposed to personally, but there's not a lot you can do about it unless you actually change ERISA, because that's where the courts have pretty much come down. So in addition to not getting disclosures, to not having uniform protection from creditors, not having access to federal courts, the biggest financial loss, I think, is the loss of access to the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. The PBGC provides very substantial benefits for pension plans that go bust. And those benefits increase annually as a function of age. So as a 65-year-old, you get a certain amount, and as a 75-year-old, you get substantially more. On the contrary, and I can share with you all the exact numbers, I haven't memorized them, but they're pretty significant. Under an annuity contract, the maximum amount of coverage per individual per lifetime that you could possibly get would be $500,000. And while $500,000 may sound like a good chunk of change, it's not a good chunk of change if you're 65 years old and planning to live for 30 years. Or even 20 years, because that's per individual per lifetime. And by the way, 500,000 is the most. Most states have limits of 250,000.
Wow.
When we started this, there were a number of states that were as low as 100, but they've all since upped their level of coverage to at least 250.
All right. Before we move on, I want the board to know that you can ask a question at any time. If there's a slide, there's a question you have, please ask it, because I hate to go through all these and then you forgot what you wanted to ask. So I just wanted to state that. All right.
Yes, and absolutely, if you have any questions, please ask them.
I have one right now.
Please.
I was wondering if the 70,000 people that GE booted out and froze, did they fall under something like this?
Well, is the 75 the ones that were recently transferred to Athene?
Yeah,
Yes, those were de-risked, yes.
they
Yeah.
fell under state mandate.
They are now certificate holders under a group annuity contract that is essentially run by a company called Athene, that is funded by Apollo. I'll get
that
into
was
some.
behind them. Apollo,
Yeah, Apollo is behind them. And I don't know if you guys have followed this, but Leon Black, who I've been following for quite some time, Leon Black essentially made his fortune off the back of the executive life companies going back to the late 90s. He
Yeah.
took over the bond portfolio for Executive Life of California, which was the parent company of Executive Life of New York. And he took over the bond portfolio and sold it for a $3.5 billion profit inside of a year. Used that $3.5 billion to fund Apollo. And so now he is the founder of Apollo. He recently stepped down as chief executive of Apollo as a result of some bad press about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein.
Let me give you a little more background to that. The GE Silicones plant where I worked that was sold, Apollo was the group. The private equity company was Apollo that took it over. And within 3 years, they ran it into the ground, decimated benefits and wages, and then sold it off. And as a matter of fact, they declared bankruptcy and then sold it off. So that's Apollo. And if Apollo's the back in Althene, that would make me question them being in the picture at all, as far as
Yeah, well, when we're done, you'll question it even more, because not only there's a very cozy relationship between Apollo and Athene. Athene wants the assets. You know, they really want those annuity assets because they think that they can make more money investing them, because they're considered what's known as kind of a sticky asset.
Yeah.
So when they take over, they get the cash from this pension and they can invest it, and they do it in a way that allows them to fly below the radar under the guise that they're going to earn more than they would in a regulated insurance company. And if they do, great. If they don't, not so great.
Yeah,
But I'll
right.
dig in. I'll dig into a whole bunch in a little bit. I want to get through a little bit of the differences, just so you guys know what to look out for.
Sure.
So under a pension, you have the creditors, you know, at bay. You're going to get an annual statement, which is really, to me, very important. And from many of the retirees I've spoken to, it's very important too. It's not that you want to make investment decisions for the plan, but you want to know how it's doing. And as people plan for their lives, they want to know, am I underwater? Is this pension money good for 20 years, or do I have something to worry about?
Right, like GE's recent deficits that they've
Yeah,
been
that's right.
digging
That's
out.
right. That's right. And again, the PBGC, the group annuity contract, the biggest issue that I have, in addition to the fact that state laws are not uniform, so some states, a creditor could get at your annuity payment. The coverage limits of guarantee associations are also, not only are they capped, but they're really suspect. And what I mean by that is all guarantee associations are post-insolvency assessment vehicles, which means that's a fancy way of saying they have no money. So they only can raise money by assessing their members. And their members are all life insurance companies that write business in that state. So if you're in Kansas and there's 10 insurance companies that write life insurance business in Kansas, and one of them fails, the other 9 have to pony up to fund the guarantee association to cover the cost of liquidating the failed company. Well, the other 9 companies might not have the ability to do it, and they certainly won't want to do it. So their ability to do it.
That's really interesting. The creditor protections, again, if they sell it off to an annuity or transfer it to an annuity, And then what you just said there, that if one of them goes under, the rest of them got to pony up, and God knows if the money's going to be there.
Right. And I can tell you this, I mean, the Executive Life of New York company at its heyday was a $3.5 billion insurance company. And they had to fight tooth and nail to get the insurance companies to chip in after 25 years of rehabilitation. If a
Wow.
company like a Prudential went bust, that's 100 times bigger than Executive Life of New York, there's no way the other companies would have the wherewithal to pony up what they'd have to pony up.
Yeah.
It's just not going to work. But the reason for all this is that insurance companies under the McCarran-Ferguson Act are regulated by the states unless Congress specifically chooses to regulate them for a specific purpose. So there is a way that Congress can.
When was that act put in, Ed?
1954, I believe.
Oh, really? That sounds
It
like.
is quite some time ago.
Yeah.
The reason McCarran-Ferguson was written back in the day when it was very hard for an adjuster to get from state A to state B. So if you had a California insurance company and you were located in Florida and there was a fire in your house, it was very hard for the California insurer to get an adjuster to Florida. And so they made it a state issue. And that made some sense when it was hard to get from place to place. But
Yeah.
today it makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
it's one of the things that the insurance industry wants to keep, because that way they know which jurisdictions are friendly and which jurisdictions are not friendly. And we'll talk about that as we get a little further on. If you could flip to the next slide, please, that'd be great.
Uh,
There you go. Okay, so all of this comes down to, why do you guys care about this? Well, you care because, and the most important thing in my mind is there's too few companies with too much money at risk. So by my estimate, which we'll come to later, since I started tracking this really actively in 2012, there's been $165 billion transferred from defined benefit plans to annuity companies. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And there's really only a handful of players. You know, Prudential is probably the largest. MetLife and Athene are next. You got a couple others like Mass Mutual who participate on some level. And really, it really falls off after that. There's not a ton of people in the business. There's an enormous concentration risk. And what we learned during the financial crisis is nobody's too big to fail.
Yeah. Is
So-
AIG in that list, Ed?
No, AIG has not been, they're not a big player in this. But yeah, that would be one to look out for. I do watch for them all the time, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was very familiar with what happened when they went under. But yeah, the biggest is Prudential, MetLife, Athene are the most active right now. So, you know, in addition to the hundreds of billions of dollars that's at stake, more and more of these publicly traded life insurance companies are monkeying around with their reserves. And what I mean by that is, a regulated insurance company has to hold a certain amount of assets in what are called tier 1 assets, admitted assets, which are supposed to be secure. That would be publicly traded stocks and bonds, things of that nature that you would understand, and things that are liquid. It doesn't mean that they're always going to be as valuable as they were on the date you purchased them, but they'd be liquid, and they'd have to have certain ratings and things of that nature. More and more of these companies are offloading their reserves by doing transactions internal to their own group with wholly owned captive reinsurance companies. Athene in particular uses a company in Bermuda. So what they do is the regulated company substitutes its assets for an IOU. So that regulated company now depends on Athene Bermuda to make good on that IOU when it's time to pay the piper. The problem is that Bermuda company is not subject to regulation in the United States.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they don't have the same rules about what you can invest in and what kind of risk you can take.
And that's legal. They can do that right now.
Well, they can do it if their regulator approves what's called credit for reinsurance. So if the regulator approves it, they can do it.
Are you talking state regulator or are you talking federal?
State,
State,
that's the whole challenge. It's the state regulator, and for the most part, these big insurance companies are so complex that the state regulators are simply not up to the task of understanding what they're doing, and they don't do it all at once. They do it little by little,
Sure.
deal by deal. I mean, I've been tracking Prudential, literally, I could show you a slide that would blow your mind, but Prudential has over 200 billion in related party reinsurance transactions. And it's all circular. There's nothing, it's not, if you
Is
buy
it-
reinsurance from a third party, arguably you're better off.
Yeah.
Because a third party's taking the risk that if there's not enough money there, they'll step in.
No,
But
is
if you're
it-
capitalizing your own reinsurer and you're transferring the risk from pocket A to pocket B,
yeah.
you're no better off.
What about, are they doing that in the United States or outside the United States, Prudential?
Prudential's doing it in the United States, in
Okay.
Arizona.
Okay.
They have 6 wholly owned captive reinsurance companies located in Arizona. Arizona has a very lax captive insurance company law that does not require them to produce financial statements.
Right.
And they allow them to use conditional assets to count against their surplus. So they can use conditional letters of credit. They can use parental guarantees. They can use what's known as a surplus note, which is really debt. It's a debt that's subordinate to policyholder claims, but it's still debt. But they're allowed to count that as an asset in Arizona. They would never be allowed to count it in New Jersey or in any place that the insurance company was regulated in the US.
So if Prudential holds a say they held GE's annuity contract and it would still fall, you're talking about Arizona and their ability to move money around, but wouldn't they still be regulated in New York under
No,
different?
Prudential's regulated in New Jersey, but yes, Prudential would be regulated in New Jersey. Prudential Financial Inc. is a holding company. It owns 4 primary regulated insurance companies. Those insurance companies all upstream a lot of money to the holding company. It's the regulated insurance companies that are doing the deals with the wholly owned captive reinsurers. And so they're holding less in assets and less in reserve because they're substituting reserves with an IOU from a wholly owned captive insurance company.
Okay.
That's what it's doing. So they're really moving stuff around, and it's not going to show up immediately on day one, but it's a real reason for people to be concerned and to want them to be more transparent about their reporting. And that's what we are very, very, very focused on right now.
Okay.
So in addition to that, I'm sure you guys all read about what happened with MetLife when they lost 25,000 retirees. There was a big lawsuit involving the SEC. They wound up paying a fine. And it seemed as though, the problem was resolved. But what most people don't realize is MetLife contributed over $500 million to reserves after they paid the fine. So why did they contribute $500 million back? They put it back because they took it out. In other words, they were using these kind of financial chicanery to pull money out of reserves by not paying retirees. So when they didn't pay them,
doesn't the insurance companies, I mean, seems like it's kind of a detriment to them to even play these kinds of games. I mean,
well,
what are they
think
gaining by
that-
doing that?
Well, they think, that the gain is and you'll see that it's almost always done with publicly traded insurers. The mutuals don't do it because there's no benefit. The publicly traded insurers who manage for earnings, they get to use that cash for other purposes. They get to use it for mergers and acquisitions, to pay corporate salaries, to do all sorts of things. And the reason they do it is they believe that the reserves are redundant or excessive. So they think the regulators are asking them to hold too much in reserve. So they ask the regulator to allow them to approve a transaction with an affiliate, and that reduces the amount of real assets that they have to hold. And so the more they do that, the more they can upstream the excess to their parent company. And they use it to buy back stock. They use it to buy other companies. They use it to pay salaries and recruit, recruit members of their management team.
So how did MetLife get caught? Is that the next bullet point?
Yeah. So MetLife got caught, which is an interesting question. So I understand that there were a couple of whistleblowers who alerted the SEC that the pension payments weren't made. And, a lot of the business that MetLife was doing, some of it was their own business. Some of it, they were just servicing for other companies. Sometimes they just take over blocks of business and they make the payments. And so a lot of the businesses, they quote unquote lost track of these folks because all they were doing was sending out 2 letters. And if you didn't respond, they just assumed you were dead. And they never bothered to check the master death index, which is published by the Social Security, which shows whether people are alive or dead. Ironically, they were checking it for the annuity business because if someone dies and they're getting an annuity, they want to stop the payment right away. But when it was life insurance, they didn't want to stop the payments. So they got dinged for that. And as they looked in, they saw that they were also missing these payments to all these pensioners because they were doing the same thing. They were only sending out 2 letters and then they would stop making the payments. So once they found out, there was a big hullabaloo. The SEC in Massachusetts filed a lawsuit. There were a couple other lawsuits that were filed. They have ultimately settled for a slap on the wrist. But I will show you, they put over $500 million back into reserves at the regulated company because the regulators realized what had happened.
Yeah.
So you got to really watch this stuff closely because these guys are very, very tricky. So for them, if they couldn't find somebody, it was found money because the way this works is they hold these reserves. They don't do it on an individual retiree basis, but let's say they have 10,000 retirees. When that number goes down to 8,000, they do their actuarial calculation, their reserve number goes down. That excess they can take out. And that's exactly what they did. And that's one of the biggest reasons why this is so crazy.
Yeah.
So if you could switch to the next slide, John, that would be great. Okay, so a little bit more. They forgot to pay tens of thousands. They got a $19.75 million fine. SEC made them pay another $10 million for pension accounting violation. And they went right back into the business. And they started doing more and more pension risk deals. So that's kind of, where it's at now. I don't know why this.
Who's watching them? Just the SEC's the only thing
Well,
watching?
no, MetLife is supposed to be supervised by the Department of Financial Services of the state of New York.
Okay.
But let me ask you guys a question about MetLife, just because out of curiosity. What was the most iconic brand in the insurance industry that you ever saw in your lifetime?
Jeez.
I mean, you
Well,
remember
I remember
Snoopy?
MetLife. Huh?
You remember Snoopy?
Yeah.
Snoopy? Yeah.
Woodstock.
Yeah, and Snoopy was always the kind of MetLife. So
I
Snoopy,
go back to Ed, to the days when the insurance man used to come to your house and collect the premium.
my wife was just telling me about that because she remembered her grandparents telling her that he used to come and take $1.
Yeah.
He'd come by and take $1, and if you weren't there, he'd just come back the next week.
I did that once.
There you go.
Did you take the $1 or give the $1?
I tried to get him to pay a whole bunch of nickels all at once. I had some nickel policies.
That's hilarious.
Were they worth a plug nickel?
But a lot of those policies were actually what's known as participating whole life policies. They weren't the worst policy. They weren't the worst things in the world. You'd get, you pay the money in and it would grow based on how well the insurance company did.
It was
So
the
they
best deal the person who took it out at their age they ever got in their life.
Yeah, because the more money they put in, the more they got a share of what the insurance company made. And as these insurance companies got big, they did share substantial profits. Again, mostly the mutuals, but the business really changed when a lot of these companies converted to being publicly traded, where they're answering to shareholders much more so than they are policyholders. So in any event, what really kind of got us discussing these issues together was the decision by General Electric to transfer 1.7 billion in pension plan obligations to Athene. And like I said, I've been following Athene for a long time for lots of reasons, have a lot of concerns about them, not just because they have a Bermuda company, but just because I don't trust Apollo. I know Apollo, has done, Apollo, I'm not going to criticize their ability to invest, but I think that if they could stiff policyholders, they do it in a heartbeat if they can make a buck.
Well,
And so-
and I'll say again, back dealing with Apollo up there at GE Silicones, when we got sold, they are the dirtiest. All they do is
Yeah.
squeeze you to death and then file bankruptcy. Boom.
Right.
That's their
Absolutely.
business model.
Yep. And I think that's something you need to be looking out for. So you can go to the next slide if you don't mind, John. So yeah, I track this. I mean, this number is probably understated because some of the transactions are not reported yet for the fourth quarter of 2020. But by our estimations, which we pull from some insurance think tank studies and publicly available information, this is the number that we've confirmed has been transferred from defined benefit plan sponsors to insurance companies. That's a significant amount of money, and a lot of retirees. There were 41,000, Verizon retirees, over 100 GM. Those are the two big ones. 70,000 were impacted in the GE deal, and I know GE's got a lot more that they're probably looking to get rid of.
Well, that's the big scare, Ed, is that the next contract, they're nibbling, as I say, in the next contract, who knows what they're going to say? We're going to transfer this all to an annuity.
Now, for you guys, how of your members, are you management, union, combination?
Both, yeah.
Both?
We're salaried and hourly, both.
Okay, so the union issues are a little bit different because you really got to look at what was done in collective bargaining. If the unions were careful and they collectively bargained with respect to their pension, you may have a shot. The problem is all of these pension plans now put in what's called a reservation of rights clause,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
basically says, we plan sponsor reserve the right to screw you at any time.
Yeah, that's just what they put in on healthcare, and that's what we're afraid they're going to put in on pension,
Yeah, I bet it's already there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't know. I'd have to go look, but in
Well,
the annual statement.
Yeah, take a look at your summary plan document. If you send it to me, I'll show you where the reservation of rights clause is. I'm pretty good at finding them now.
Yeah,
But I have not seen one for a big company in recent years that didn't have a reservation of rights clause.
right.
'Cause
That's
there's no-
another GE strategy, putting that in there. They snuck it in there before, and the union never caught it on the healthcare.
Yeah. Well, the union could have prevented it by collectively bargaining in a way.
Yeah,
And they had to collectively bargain and have it determined to be a vested benefit that they would not take away. But if they didn't collectively bargain it, and there's a reservation of rights clause, it's going to be very hard to stop them from taking it away.
and the two things with the union, as you well know, the unions are down to barely anything anymore. And all the big locations, Lynn and Louisville and Schenectady and all over the country, their numbers are down to almost nothing, and they have no bargaining power anymore. And also they've been fighting on the CBC, the Coordinated Bargaining Committee. So their chances of resisting GE trying to do anything is what I'm saying is near nil,
Well, GE, you got to think that GE is many steps ahead.
Oh, absolutely.
they-
That's why I say they're trying these things out to see what the reaction is going to be. And we've brought up at every meeting, every fall meeting, we've brought up, are you going to de-risk? No, absolutely not. No, absolutely not. And then they do the terminology bit, well, it's not de-risking. That's a buyout, or that's a freeze, or that,
Yeah.
they do the language
Well,
stuff.
So a buyout is de-risking because what they're doing is they're using a different discount rate to calculate the buyout payment,
Yeah,
and that saves the money. So if they're discounting your pension liabilities at, say, 3.5%, and they offer you a lump sum and they discount it at 6%, the difference is really a savings for them. because
yeah,
the
absolutely.
impact of discounting over, your life expectancy is what they're doing.
Yeah,
All right, so if you go to the next slide, what I've determined over the past decade is that there's no way that we're going to stop corporations from de-risking. It's just, we can try all kinds of things and we can try and make them more accountable and more transparent, but we're not going to be able to stop them for a number of reasons. Number one, defined benefit plans are a thing of the past. Very few big corporations are offering them anymore. Everybody's trying to move towards defined contribution, like 401k plans and things like that.
right.
That's just the way things are moving. That creates a whole host of risks, but that's not really my focus. My focus is on making sure that retirees' earned benefits are protected. So there's a need right now to make sure that whatever protections you had under ERISA are replaced at the state level. It shouldn't be that difficult for some things. And the key things that we're really concerned about is we talked about credit protection. The other things that we look at on the state level is also subsequent transfers. I mean, the example that I like to give is, well, let's say Prudential is a good insurance company, and Prudential is a good insurance company. They do some things that I don't like, but I think they manage their businesses well. I think they service well. They keep accurate records when they want to. But I think that, what if Prudential decided to transfer it to the Eddie Stone Insurance Company?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want that, and there's right now there's no restrictions, and insurance companies transfer books of business all the time, and they do it in ways that are not so obvious. They can do it through assumption and reinsurance. They can do it just by selling a whole block. And there's been a lot of insurance merger and acquisition activity, very significant, just over the past couple of months. And I believe it's going to increase. And Prudential just announced that they were planning to do $10 billion in M&A over the next 2 years.
How many of them try to go offshore, Ed?
Athene is the one that uses the big offshore entities. A lot of them stopped because they found that they could use captive reinsurers onshore. And they think that creates less scrutiny, because a lot of people see, oh, if it's offshore, we have no control over it. If it's onshore and it's in another state, that must be okay. So I know Prudential, which I follow very closely, is mostly onshore. MetLife is mostly onshore. Athene has a very, very significant offshore reinsurance operation in Bermuda. And Bermuda's better than most jurisdictions.
If I'm in New York and we got board members in Kansas and other states, it doesn't go under my individual state. If they have this contract in, like you said earlier, New Jersey or something, that's their main hub. Is that where it's regulated, or is it regulated in each state?
Well, that's actually an excellent question. So the insurance company itself is regulated in their state of domicile. So Prudential is domiciled in New Jersey. MetLife is domiciled in New York. Athene, I think, is domiciled in, I want to say Iowa.
Yeah, I think it is Iowa. I think
it's Iowa.
Yeah.
So those are the states who are the primary regulators. So they're the ones that have to approve their transactions, and they're the ones who would be the regulator in the event of an insolvency. As far as you,
I think a lot of people were under the assumption the minute you were transferred to the state mandate, then they go into your state individually.
but it does. That's right, John. So for the individual, your individual annuity certificate, your rights are governed by the state that you reside in at the time that the insurance company becomes insolvent or impaired. I know that's a mouthful. But so, for example, State Guarantee Association coverage will be based on where you live when there's an impairment or an insolvency.
I got you.
But
That's when it falls under your state.
Right. Okay. Does that clear it up for you?
Yeah, that does for me, because I was always under the assumption that they were regulated just by the state you lived in, period, not just on
No.
solvency or.
No. That's unfortunately not the case. Because the group contract, it changes all the rules, because you're not an owner of that contract anymore. It's not like you took out the insurance contract.
Yeah,
You just
that's
get you just get a certificate.
right.
You're a certificate holder.
Okay.
And so it's the regulator in their domicile kind of takes care of what they do and how they're reserved and whether or not they get put into examination and whether or not they get audited. But for you as an individual certificate holder, your rights are under state law.
Okay.
Okay. So if you go to the next slide, I'll talk to you about a little of the success that we've had. And it's not so little, it's pretty significant because nobody else is doing it. But we passed a law in Connecticut that dealt with protecting creditors, protecting pensioners from creditor claims. This is one of those ambiguous things where people say, oh, you don't have to worry about it, but the law is not clear. And so we clarified the law in Connecticut, and it basically says to the extent that you're receiving benefits that were at any time covered under ERISA, creditors can't get at it, period, full stop. If you go to the next slide,
Yeah.
John, so the things that are still needed in Connecticut that we're looking into doing now, we're really working on two key things. And there's really a couple of more, but there were two that we presented that we hope that we'll get them to address. One of which I addressed in last year's session, but it didn't get to the House floor. It did get through to the committees, but it didn't quite get voted on. Last year was a very difficult year,
Yeah.
obviously, to pass anything because of COVID. But we really wanted to force people to put in some protections that say, hey, Prudential, you can't transfer to the Eddystone Annuity Company because that's not a fair risk for retirees to take on when they have no control over it. So we presented that and got pretty far in past sessions, but we're going to revisit that again this year. And the other thing we wanted to do is we want to require these insurance companies to disclose how these assets are invested. I don't know about every transaction because I don't always get the contract. I did get the contract in the Verizon deal, and they set up what's known as a separate account. So the pension assets that Verizon was invested in were transferred to Prudential, and they're supposed to be segregated for the benefit of the retirees, of the Verizon retirees. So we asked Prudential to disclose how much was still there, how much they paid out, and what changes took place, actuarially year over the year. And they said, no, we can't disclose it. And I said, why? And they said, well, we're not required to. I said, okay, but it's a lot of money and it's supposed to be in a separate account. And the separate account was supposed to be for the benefit of the Verizon retirees. They want you to disclose it. Why don't you? And they said, well, we're not required to. We're not disclosing it.
Sounds like a GE answer.
Well, the reason they don't want to disclose it is because they don't want to say what they're invested in.
Yeah.
Now, they do disclose separate account assets in their public filings, but they disclose them on a group basis. So in other words, you can't see what's in the individual contract. You can only see all of their separate account business. And there's no way to really make heads or tails of that because you don't know what's related to the 41,000 lives that were in the Verizon deal. So that wasn't very satisfying. So that's one of the issues that I'm still pushing, is to require them to disclose at the state level anything that's in a separate account. Keep it simple, just break it down by asset class and any material changes and assumptions year over year,
Now,
which I don't think is.
companies you've dealt with, do they mainly do separate accounts for the pension accounts, or are they other ones you've dealt with? You were talking what, Prudential, right?
Yeah, Prudential they do mostly separate accounts, and they offer this guarantee of the parent company. And, that's when I started digging into all these financial shenanigans, because I was initially of the view that, this isn't a bad thing. And I'm not saying it is a bad thing, but it's something that you just need to be concerned about. But if Prudential's parent company is on the hook, then you've got all this money that's in a separate account. That should be sufficient. And if for whatever reason they blow through all that cash, you've got the guarantee of the parent company. That's certainly worth a lot of money. I mean, Prudential has, hundreds of billions of dollars in assets under management.
Right.
So, that is a comfort. Unfortunately, not really being able to peel back the onion and see what's there it's hard to feel as warm and fuzzy as I would like. But
And
it's still
Prudential-
better. It's still better to be in a separate account.
Prudential is headquartered in Connecticut,
New Jersey.
New Jersey. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you would go to the next slide, John, that would be great. All right. So in Virginia, we passed a law that both protected both protected pensioners from creditor claims across the board, and also limited transfers. So that was the first time we were able to really prevent subsequent transfers without either the approval of the insurance commissioner, or the transferee had to be rated A or better by at least 2 nationally recognized rating agencies. And that was a bit of a compromise, but we still thought it was pretty good to make it so that the whole idea was you can't transfer from a solvent company to an insolvent company,
Yeah,
or to a
yeah.
less solvent company.
you're right.
So that worked out pretty well, and we're going to revisit this in Virginia, but probably not this year. They have a shortened session, so it looks like we'll probably be on the 2022 calendar. If you go to the next, I don't know if any of you guys are former New Yorkers or not, but New York is quite an interesting place from a legislative standpoint. I've been
I'm a former
working
New
with
Yorker.
Assemblyman Abadi for a long time. He's a big labor guy. He's a delight as a person. He's had trouble getting this to move past the insurance committee. And then Andrew Gennardis, also a young senator, has signed on again this year. And it was immediately referred to the insurance committee, where unfortunately, what seems to happen in New York is they put it into the insurance company and it just doesn't go anywhere. So I reached out to the Department of Financial Services and I said, hey, you should be concerned about this. Look at what's happening with Athene. They just fined Athene. They actually, I don't know if you guys know this, but they fined Athene for doing pension risk transfer deals with New York retirees without being licensed in New York.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Well,
So
that's,
they find it.
so what, an interesting question, 70,000, how many of them are from New York?
That's a good question. I could find out.
Yeah, I'd like to know that.
Sure. Yeah, that would be actually interesting to see. I'm going to make a note of that. I'm going to check that out.
Yeah,
It might not be immediately available, but they'll have to do something. I'm going to ask Department of Financial Services. I might have you ask them, John, if you don't mind, but
that's
I'll
all
put you
right.
in touch.
Yeah,
Say we're curious. We're curious. So that's what happened to New York. If you go to the next slide, I'll tell you what I think is going on
all right.
and where we can kind of talk about some ways to have an impact. So Lyconi is the Life Insurance Council of New York. And they are really the lobbying arm for the ACLI, which is the American Council of Life Insurers. They don't like the idea of disclosure by the insurance companies.
Of course.
I'm really a little bit surprised about it. They continually wheel out these statistics about how insurance companies did better during the financial crisis than banks. And they use this as a justification for not disclosing. And my point to them and my point to members of Congress and members of the state legislatures across the country is, what's wrong with disclosure? If
Yeah.
you don't have anything to hide, why not let people have some peace of mind and know how things are going?
Exactly.
These benefits are calculated based on years and years of future payments and what they're going to earn on their assets. You can't look at it and just say, oh, Prudential's a good company. Who knows what they're going to look like in 20 years? Look what happened to AIG. Look what happened to Lehman Brothers.
All right.
It just doesn't make any sense. But the ACLI is the primary proponent of no disclosure and no regulation.
Well, whenever we hear anyway, no non-disclosure and it immediately raises a red flag in my opinion.
Yeah.
They're hiding something. There's something they're doing that they don't want us to know about.
And when I do talk to members of the legislature, they're pretty receptive to things about disclosure. They really are. So I thought it would be interesting to discuss what happened in Pennsylvania, because I know you have some union members.
Next one. Yeah, there we go.
this guy, Dan Mull, proposed a bill that was really modeled after the Virginia one. It both addressed the protection for creditors and subsequent transfers. The bill got pretty far along. He had plenty of co-sponsors, plenty of support on both sides, but the union opposed it.
Why? Why the union?
I don't know. I
Investment.
don't know. It was the AFL-CIO. They just opposed it. They said, we are opposed to de-risking. I'm like, well, so am I. You know, so-
Yeah,
But once you're de-risked, what are you gonna do? You gotta, if you haven't been de-risked, then you're governed under ERISA. And if you didn't collectively bargain, you're gonna be shit out of luck if they do de-risk you.
yeah,
And our interests are aligned. But they
Yeah.
refused to discuss it and they just opposed it. And their opposition was all based on they opposed de-risking. But I just thought it would be worthwhile sharing that with you guys in case that should come up again. I'm quite puzzled by it.
Yeah, if they know the history, I should bring up the slide that you, or PDF that you sent me of all the companies. If they know
Yeah.
that the history of this and the way this is going, why, you want to put protections in case they do it?
Yeah. And by the way, John, you could share that with all the people on this call and with anybody on your board.
Okay,
I gave John a list of companies that I've been tracking. And, it's a who's who of America, basically.
yeah,
I mean, you'll recognize many of the names. It's companies like United Technologies, the New York Times, General Motors, Verizon, now GE. I could go on and on.
Right.
It's a pretty incredible list. So yeah, I just wanted to alert you to that because it did concern me. I'd like to fix it, frankly, because I think that the unions could really benefit from addressing this issue head on and not letting it get past them. Because if they don't deal with it in collective bargaining, they're going to
exactly.
be subject to the same reservation of rights clauses that all of you are, and the plan sponsors will make an amendment to the plan and amend the plan to kick out retirees, including union retirees.
That's exactly what'll happen.
Yeah. All right. So some of the other potential states that we've been talking about, I'll whip through them quickly. New Jersey, Rhode Island, we had some traction. Maryland, there was interest from some of our members last year. Same with Delaware. Massachusetts, we had a bill that was actually proposed, and then we lost the sponsor. Some of these guys, unfortunately, we get a sponsor and then they lose their election. So we have to revisit it there. We haven't done anything yet in California, but I work with a large ERISA law firm there, and they're very interested in helping promote something there. And then I was in touch with the Fiat Chrysler guys, and they were very interested in proposing something in Michigan where a lot of their members are. So that's kind of what's on our agenda for the states now. Our main push is going to be in Connecticut and New York, this session. And really what we're doing is we're gearing up towards next year. Our focus is divided into kind of two things, right? One is educating people in the legislature and retiree groups about why de-risking is important. And the other thing is actually taking steps to lobby the legislature. And as I explained to John, I've created a new retiree association that's designed to be
Right.
national justice, and we should be getting underway by the end of first quarter this year. And that'll be the vehicle that we're going to use with the Beltel folks and with other folks strictly to do lobbying at the state level. And we're also trying to make some changes to ERISA to hold the chief executives and the fiduciaries responsible in the event that they de-risk and they get into trouble because the insurance company goes bust.
Yeah.
One of the really interesting things under ERISA is that although it's been eroded over the years, there still is this notion of you're supposed to choose the safest available annuity provider. So when you look at a company like Athene, it's only been in business for 10 years. It's funded by a private equity fund.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a 100-year tradition of writing group annuities, right? And it has a somewhat sketchy track record in terms of the way they've treated policyholders in the past. How do they come off as that being the safest available annuity provider?
Did I send you, Ed, the GE sent me something and I don't know if I forwarded it to you about Athene's background and was kind of touting them. And I'm, listening to you and then knowing about Apollo in the background and maybe some offshore stuff going on, I'm saying to myself,
Yeah.
they aren't reputable and they don't have a long-term experience.
No, and especially not, they don't have any experience with these retiree businesses, right? I mean, they've been in business for 10 years. They bought a bunch of different, they want sticky capital. They're all about aggregating assets. And their theory is we can earn more on the assets than other people can. So we want a lot of assets so we can have Apollo. Most of the asset management fees that were earned from Athene assets went to Apollo.
Wow.
Now listen, as long as they do well, you'll be okay. But it's
Yeah.
if they don't do well and it turns out they're under reserved,
Yeah.
that's where there's an issue. And I think that people have been taking a little bit too many liberties with the reserving, and that's something that could come back to haunt and just retirees generally, because I think that the pension crisis that we face now is really a global crisis. And the answer is not to hide things. The answer is to make sure that people look out for retirees and do what they can to protect benefits that you guys earned. I mean, I know from talking to tons of folks, both at DuPont and the Beltel folks, I mean, you guys traded, higher salaries for benefit packages. And now systematically, your healthcare benefits, your pension benefits, your life insurance benefits are under siege. And it's just, it's just not right. So one of the things that we're looking to do with Retirees for Justice is to force chief executives and fiduciaries to remain on the hook if they wound up stuffing retirees down the road. And one of the ways we're going to do it is ask them to eliminate any statutes of limitations. Under ERISA, the statutes of limitations are either 3 or 6 years.
Oh,
But
really?
these pension blocks are 20, 30-year liability streams they're looking at. We don't
So
think
when they tried to claw back some money from Jeff Inmelt and they waited long enough over to 3 years or 5 years or something and they said, no, we're not going to do it anyway. But they probably did it at that point or hesitated or delayed it to that point so they wouldn't end up having an ERISA case against them, because a lot of people feel part of the decimation of GE and the downfall of GE, that's how we got hit on the healthcare. That was part of it. And we couldn't go back after them under ERISA, because, or try to get some money out of Jeff Inmelt anyway, because of what you just said. They only had a statute of limitations for so long.
That's right. That's right. And that's one of the things I want to change. I want to basically make it so there is no statute of limitations. It doesn't mean you automatically win, but they can't hide behind. They have superior knowledge to your average retiree, right? They know what they've got coming down the pike. They've got actuaries working for them. They've got all sorts of financial people. And if they do something to pad their own pockets and they put retirees at risk, they shouldn't be able to get away with it just because time passes.
Yeah. And a lot of that was in the lawsuit. I don't know if you knew that, Ed. A lot of that when on the salaried side in the lawsuit, there was a lot of that history and background about everything that went on to, get rid of that healthcare, starting with the salaried people. So there's a lot of good history in there about that, but you can't do anything about it now anyway.
No. But one of the things we're going to try and do is we're going to try and change ERISA to make it so that you can't discriminate against retirees. In other words, if they're going to make changes to their plan, we're not going to be able to stop them.
Yeah.
But they shouldn't be allowed to change the healthcare benefits that only impact the retired folks who are not in a position to do anything about it.
That's true.
I have
So-
a question.
Sure.
And this may not even apply to it, but with Social Security claiming by 2035 to be out of money, is there ever any chance at all that the feds could do a de-risk on the Social Security?
The feds could do a de-risk on Social Security. In other words, have some sort of private-public partnership where other folks came in or they bailed out Social Security?
Yes.
Well, privatize it, yeah, privatize it to 401ks. Remember, they talked about that strategy for a
Yeah,
long time.
they tried to do that in the latter part of the Bush administration, and it didn't pan out because
Yeah.
really the
I think that, yeah, I think the problem is making the economics work, right? Because Social Security is, definitely a challenge. Look, the real problem with pension de-risking, when you look at it right now, and the reason that all these things are a big concern, is that we've lived through an unprecedented interest rate environment. So in the old days, to manage a pension, all you had to do was buy a laddered bond portfolio, and you match your assets and your liabilities. And it's the same issue with Social Security, right? People are living longer than expected, and the folks are earning less on their assets. And that's really the challenge, both with Social Security and with pensions. So I know that people have talked about private-public partnerships and ways to strengthen it. It's above my pay grade in terms of how to change that policy. But if I hear of anything, I'll certainly let you know.
Yeah, that's legislative that, they'd have to
It
go.
would have to be at the federal level too, because
Yeah,
they're gonna be.
absolutely.
So
Okay.
that's kind of what we're all about. I had talked to John about this Retirees for Justice and how we might collaborate. Our focus is going to be primarily on pension de-risking at the state level, and then working with other folks to change ERISA to protect retiree earned benefits. That's kind of the philosophy. It's very focused. We're gonna face a number of the same issues, and the more we can work together, from my standpoint, the better. A lot of times when we do introduce legislation in the states, I like to work with retirees, because I find that the members of the legislature are very receptive to constituents speaking out and contacting them. So one of the things we're setting up is a way for us to steer people directly to the right member of the legislature on the issue at hand. And that's very powerful when it comes from different folks. And you still retain your identity as GE retiree, but if we work together, we'll be able to have more of an impact, I think, at the state level. Even if you just chime in and say, hey, I support this legislation. Sometimes just writing a letter, when you get 1,000 retirees writing, it makes a difference.
Yep. This organization, you guys, if you see where I'm moving the mouse, it's right down here in this second to last paragraph, Retirees for Justice. And Ed asked me if I'd come on board once they're formed and be on the board there. So I'm definitely considering that. And a matter of fact, I basically said yes, I believe. Too many responsibilities, but anyway, I think this is a very, very important topic, and I keep saying that every time we do a post about pension, if you on our sister page, our news page, every time we do a thing on pension, we get such an influx of views and participation. And then every healthcare survey we've done, our annual healthcare survey, that's the second issue. Of course, it was healthcare when that was going on, but now it's pensions. Are they going to go after that next? They're decimating our lives and taking things away from us. So we got to stay on our toes on this issue. We really have to stay on our toes. Whether we're going to get good union backing with the size of the union and the troubles they're having on the CBC and all that stuff, I don't know. But if there's any way, legally with Ed or anything else, we can do something to resist this and make sure they're following the letter of the law, whether it's ERISA, PBGC, or state. If they choose to go in that direction with de-risking, then we're going to need somebody like that. We're going to need somebody like Ed, is what I'm saying. So that's the importance to me.
Well, look, I appreciate that, and I'd love to work with you guys. We can figure out the structure. I asked John to help out in the early stages, just because based on his experience in dealing with retiree associations. Some of this is old hat to me. Some of it's new. I always want to know the retiree perspective as best that I can, so I can relay it, and also so when we do the messaging, we know how to do it in a way that's going to get the most interest, because that'll be the most powerful way to speak to the legislature.
Right.
These guys, I spoke to a couple of folks from Congress over the past 2 weeks, they're very receptive about these issues because they know one thing: retirees vote early and they vote often.
And
And they're very loyal. If you-
20%, 25% of the population, 20% anyway.
And growing by the day, more and more people are reaching the age of 65 today than ever
Right,
before. and that's gonna
10,000 a day,
continue.
isn't it? Isn't that
Yeah.
the statistic? 10,000 a
Yeah.
day.
Yeah, and it's going to continue for another, let me just calculate, another 7 years or maybe 10 years, something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah,
I think it's 65 till the last baby boomer is done. And that's going to be a real issue. And
Yeah.
that just means more and more people are reaching retirement age. And what I've learned from the retirees that I've worked with is pensions are important for retirees for themselves, but it also has become, an issue for the retirees' families. I know a lot of retirees who have grandkids and, they want their pension checks coming in. They don't want to have that disrupted.
Yeah.
They take retirees that I work with, some of them have made tons of money. Others are living off their pensions. They take all
Right.
forms, but nobody wants it to go away.
Mhm.
And I think it's something that really does impact retirees and their families. So,
You go back, I don't know what it was, 2 years or 3 years that GE was 30 billion in the hole on their pension. Assets covering the liabilities, and of course we got on them and everybody got on them, and even the media, the news, it was a black eye for GE. It was one of those after things after Inmeld again. And they've been putting money in, but they're starting to do these actions that we're talking about, whether
Yeah.
it's freeze or buyouts or de-risking or annuities or transferring to annuity.
yeah,
And we got to keep our eye on this, because if GE, they're struggling right now, even to keep their head above water. They're constantly aviation and healthcare and the 4 different big businesses. And if they can keep nibbling and taking away, they're going to do it for their bottom line, period. And that's why we got to watch them.
yeah, no, you definitely have to watch it. Also, what GE did was they put a bunch of money into what's called the pre-funding balance. So it doesn't count, it's not supposed to count against their minimum required contribution,
Yeah,
but it's money that they're putting into the plan that should work for your benefit. The problem is, under the CARES Act and, because of what happened with COVID, a lot of defined benefit plan sponsors were given a break and they didn't have to contribute in 2020 at all. So what you really have to look at is what they contributed in 2021.
oh, that's going to be interesting, because
Yeah,
yeah.
and you won't see
And
that.
a lot of that relies on their interest rate and their discount rate, right? And
Well, yeah, yes, and I mean, how much they contribute is how much they contribute, but
yeah,
what the valuation of the plan is a function of what discount rate they're using,
right,
what they're assuming they're going to earn on their assets, and how they're discounting their future liabilities.
right.
And that's where a lot of people play some games. And unfortunately, the rules have made it easy for plan sponsors to use artificially inflated discount rates that don't reflect the true value. They're required in the 5500 to disclose what the plan would look like without using adjustments. So they can use adjusted rates under what's called MAP 21, but they have to also report unadjusted rates. So you can get a look at what it looks like adjusted and unadjusted. The purpose behind this was initially after the financial crisis, Congress decided to give defined benefit plan sponsors a break so they wouldn't have to put as much money into the pension plan. So they allowed them to use what's called the segment rate. So it's a long period of time. They can take an average instead of taking the past 2 years of discount rates. So essentially, what it does is it allows defined benefit plan sponsors to use too high a discount rate relative to what they're actually going to earn.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you'll see adjusted rates and unadjusted rates. And
Yeah, we do see that in the annual report. Both
Yeah.
years. Yeah.
yeah, and that'll give you a sense of where it is. And then there's a fair market value calculation they do as well. And that's the one that I usually focus on the most.
Yeah. All right. Anybody else got any questions for Ed? You all happy?
No,
All right,
We'll
well,
be
listen,
happy.
it was a pleasure meeting all of you. If you have any questions, please let me know. John, you can feel free to share the stuff I gave you with them about the other
Okay,
companies.
yeah.
And I'm sure we'll catch up when you have a free moment.
All right, Ed, very good. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
for
you,
All
your
right,
Ed.
time.
thanks, guys.
Thank
I'm gonna
you.
Thank
sign
you.
off now. Take care.
Thank you so
Glad
much.
to know that somebody is still crying in the wilderness and working for us.
Yeah.
Pushing a very large rock up a very steep hill.
Well, we're not getting behind you. We'll be in front of you.
All right.
Or at least
All right,
beside you.
guys, thanks.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Do you want to stop that recording and then restart this one?
Why?
Yeah, that would be good to post this, John, to our
Oh, okay.
website for people to view.
I don't know if I can stop. I can pause it, but I don't know if I could.
I
if I stop.
can start another one.
You sure?
Well,
All
I
right.
don't know. Try it. It's not going to hurt.
Oh, no. All right, let me see here. All right, if I do stop